The quiet conference room buzzed with nervous energy as Admiral Richardson surveyed the crowded space, his weathered face revealing nothing. "I need someone who can operate nuclear submarines," he announced, scanning the room of naval officers and engineers. "Not theory, not simulations. I need someone who's actually done it." In the back corner, a woman in a standard-issue uniform, one without the decorative pins and custom editions others wore, slowly raised her hand. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Dr. Elena Marquez stepped onto the gleaming deck of Naval Station Norfolk, her practical boots making little sound against the polished surface. At 35, she looked nothing like the polished naval officers who strode confidently across the compound in their perfectly pressed uniforms with rows of commendations. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her face free of makeup, and her uniform, while clean in regulation, lacked the personalized touches many officers added. Special pins, custom stitching, family crests, subtly incorporated. She hadn't set foot on a naval base in nearly 5 years, not since the day she'd turned in her credentials and walked away from the submarine program that had been her entire adult life. Today, she was here as a civilian consultant, accompanying her colleague, Commander James Harlow, who had specifically requested her presence at this emergency summit of naval experts. Naval Station Norfolk wasn't just any military installation. It was the world's largest naval base, home to the Atlantic Fleet and the most advanced submarines in existence. The atmosphere hummed with authority and prestige. Every corner of the facility showcased cutting-edge technology. Command centers with holographic displays, simulation rooms with million-dollar equipment, and officers wearing digital badges that granted them access to the nation's most closely guarded secrets. This was where naval careers reached their zenith, where admirals made decisions that shaped global security, where the true power of America's silent service resided beneath the surface. Elena carried only a simple leather messenger bag containing her tablet and credentials. She walked with quiet purpose, her eyes unconsciously surveying the compound, noting security patterns, entry points, and tactical positions. 5 years as a civilian hadn't erased 2 decades of naval intelligence training. The stares began almost immediately. A lieutenant commander leaning against a navigation console pushed his glasses up and smirked. "Civilian contractor or someone's assistant?" he said, loud enough for his colleagues to hear. A woman in full-dress uniform whispered to her group, "She's not even wearing proper insignia. What clearance could she possibly have?" The looks weren't curious. They were dismissive, calculated, judgmental. To them, Elena was an outsider, unranked, unimportant, invisible. Elena didn't engage or explain herself. She simply stood on the polished floor, composed and silent, watching, as the officers kept watching her back, measuring her worth and ultimately underestimating her completely. They had no idea that the woman they saw as a mere civilian was about to become the most crucial person in the room. The morning briefing was already underway when Elena and Commander Harlow entered the central conference room. The space was dominated by a massive digital table displaying a 3D topographical map of the North Atlantic. Around it stood nearly 30 high-ranking naval officers, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of the display. At the head of the table, Captain Victoria Winters commanded attention effortlessly. Her platinum blonde hair was perfectly styled beneath her cap, her uniform adorned with numerous commendations, and her bearing radiated absolute authority. She was everything Naval Station Norfolk represented: connected, confident, and completely convinced of her own importance. Victoria hadn't acknowledged Elena initially, but a subtle shift in her expression revealed her awareness of the newcomer. She turned to her assembled officers, her voice carrying deliberately. "Did someone bring their research assistant to a classified briefing? This is a strategic command center, not a university library." The chuckles were immediate and knowing. A commander wearing specialized tactical glasses joined in. "Maybe she's documenting for the Naval History Museum. Hope she brought her visitor badge." Elena's expression remained neutral. She'd weathered far worse than petty mockery during her years in service. But something cold settled in her chest as Victoria approached, heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. "You seem lost." Victoria's tone hardened. "This is a Level 8 clearance zone. You need proper credentials to be here." Elena's gaze remained steady, unflinching. Victoria's eyes traveled down to the simple messenger bag. No military insignia, no special access cards visible. Just functional leather and practical design. That's adorable. Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to mock intimacy. Let me guess, tagging along with Commander Harlow, trying to feel important? A few junior officers exchanged glances but said nothing. One lieutenant even nodded in agreement, emboldening Victoria further. Without hesitation, Victoria reached for a digital tablet on the table and deliberately slid it away from Elena's position. Classified materials, she said with exaggerated concern. Wouldn't want civilian eyes on sensitive intelligence. The room tensed with uncomfortable amusement. Someone cleared their throat. Another exchanged knowing glances with a colleague. A young ensign actually pushed his chair slightly away from Elena, as if proximity to her might damage his career prospects. Elena didn't even blink. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strategic. It absorbed their condescension like a sponge, giving nothing back, revealing nothing. But behind those calm eyes, Elena was cataloging everything. The hierarchy, the arrogance, the dangerous complacency, disguised as naval superiority. She'd seen real submarine commanders, real crisis management, real leadership. This wasn't it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena's continued silence only fueled their boldness. What had begun as casual dismissal was evolving into something more targeted, more deliberate. A commander approached with his security badge prominently displayed, as if to emphasize the difference in their status. "We should probably verify your clearance level," he said with thinly veiled suspicion. "We can't be too careful with national security." Victoria nodded toward the security console near the door. "Let's expedite this. Someone should call security and confirm her authorization." Across the room, a uniformed officer began walking over. His nameplate read Commander Ramirez, and his expression was stern and uncompromising. He didn't ask questions or investigate. He simply gestured toward the exit. "This briefing contains classified information, requiring specific clearance levels," he announced firmly. "Please return to the general administrative area until proper verification can be established." Elena looked at him for just a moment, then nodded slightly. She turned calmly and began walking toward the door, her practical boots making barely a sound on the polished floor. Behind her, the room practically vibrated with satisfaction. "She's actually leaving," someone whispered with surprise. Another officer shrugged. "Even civilians know when they're out of their depth." But then Admiral Jonathan Richardson entered, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. At 62, Richardson had commanded 3 nuclear submarines and overseen the entire Atlantic Fleet. His silver hair was cropped close to his scalp, his eyes were sharp and assessing, and his presence commanded immediate absolute respect. The room fell silent as he surveyed the assembled officers, his gaze finally landing on Elena's retreating form. "Dr. Marquez," his voice cut through the silence with quiet authority. "You're going somewhere." Elena turned to face him, meeting his gaze with that same unshakable calm. She didn't offer excuses or look flustered. She simply stood there, facing the Admiral directly. Victoria stepped forward, confidence radiating from every perfectly pressed inch of her uniform. "She was just leaving, Admiral. We were ensuring proper security protocols. She doesn't appear to have the necessary clearance for this briefing." Several officers nodded in agreement, one even adding, "Just following standard security measures, sir." Richardson's expression remained impassive, but his voice took on a different quality. "Dr. Marquez, I believe I specifically requested your presence at 0800 hours. You're actually 3 minutes early. Punctuality, one of the many reasons you were selected." The room went completely still. Victoria's smile froze, confusion flickering behind her eyes. Richardson turned to address the assembled officers, his tone matter-of-fact. "For those who haven't been briefed, we have a situation developing in the North Atlantic. A Seawolf-class submarine has gone silent after reporting unusual sonar readings." He gestured toward the digital display where a blinking red marker indicated the submarine's last known position. The USS Connecticut has missed 3 scheduled communications. We've lost all contact for the past 18 hours. The gravity of his words settled over the room like a physical weight. Richardson continued, his eyes sweeping across the tense faces. This isn't a training exercise. This is potentially the most serious submarine incident since the Kursk disaster. I've assembled the best minds available to assess and respond. His gaze returned to Elena. Which is why Dr. Marquez is here. Victoria cleared her throat, confusion evident in her voice. Admiral, I don't believe Dr. Marquez is on our current roster of tactical advisors. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about her qualifications. The question hung in the air, bold in its challenge despite the respectful phrasing. Richardson didn't immediately respond. Instead, he pressed a button on the digital table, bringing up a personnel file. Elena's photograph appeared, alongside a service record that stretched longer than most officers in the room could claim. Dr. Elena Marquez. Richardson began, his voice measured. Former Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. Served 15 years aboard nuclear submarines, including 3 as executive officer of the USS Colorado. The room went utterly silent. No shuffling of papers, no whispered comments, nothing. Dr. Marquez holds PhDs in nuclear engineering and marine propulsion systems. She wrote the current emergency protocols used by every submarine in our fleet. Richardson continued, his eyes now fixed on Victoria. She personally designed the fail-safe systems installed on the Connecticut. An officer near the back took a slow, shaky breath. Another lowered his gaze, suddenly fascinated by his own shoes. Dr. Marquez left active service 5 years ago to head the Naval Propulsion Research Division. Richardson added, closing the file with a deliberate tap. Her security clearance is higher than everyone in this room, except mine. That's when they heard it. The low, insistent tone of the emergency alert system, followed by the rapid footsteps of a communications officer entering the room. Admiral, the young woman said, handing Richardson a sealed folder. We've received a partial transmission from the Connecticut. It's heavily degraded, but... Richardson opened the folder, reviewed its contents, and looked up, his expression grave. The Connecticut is reporting catastrophic failure in their primary cooling systems. They're operating on emergency power only. Radiation containment may be compromised. The impact of his words rippled through the room. Nuclear submarine, cooling system failure, radiation containment. The implications were devastating. For the crew, for the environment, potentially for international relations. Richardson turned to the assembled experts, his voice calm but urgent. I need options. How do we establish communications? How do we assist with repairs? How do we extract the crew if necessary? The room erupted into controlled chaos. Officers consulting tablets, specialists conferring in low voices, tactical experts reviewing maps of the area. Victoria stepped forward confidently. Sir, standard protocol for this scenario calls for immediate deployment of the nearest available submarine for potential rescue operations. I recommend the USS Massachusetts, currently patrolling less than 200 nautical miles from the Connecticut's last position. Several officers nodded in agreement. A commander added, we should also notify NATO allies in the region. Norwegian vessels could reach the area within 12 hours if needed. The suggestions continued, each sounding reasonable, professional, standard, but Elena remained silent, her eyes fixed on the degraded transmission data now displayed on the main screen. Something about the pattern of system failures seemed wrong to her. Not random, not consistent with standard mechanical failure or even sabotage. Richardson noticed her focus. Dr. Marquez, he said quietly, you seem to have observations. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to Elena. Some expressions were curious now, others still skeptical, a few openly hostile. Elena stepped forward, approaching the digital display without hesitation. May I? She asked Richardson, gesturing toward the controls. He nodded once. Elena's fingers moved across the interface with practiced precision, bringing up technical schematics of the Connecticut's propulsion and cooling systems. The failure pattern is wrong, she said, her voice clear and confident. The voice of someone who had commanded submarine crews through crisis situations. If the primary cooling system failed catastrophically, we would see cascading failures in these subsystems first. She highlighted several areas of the schematic, But the transmission data shows those systems were still operational when communication was lost. She manipulated the display, bringing up a different view. What we're seeing is consistent with intentional shutdown, not failure. Someone on the Connecticut manually initiated emergency protocols, but not because of system failure. Victoria crossed her arms, skepticism evident. That's speculation, Dr. Marquez. We have clear indicators of cooling system malfunction. Elena didn't engage directly with the challenge. Instead, she expanded another section of the schematic. The Connecticut is equipped with my modified Scorpio failsafe system, she explained. It generates a specific diagnostic signature during true system failures, a signature that's absent from this transmission. Her fingers traced a pattern across the display. This isn't a cooling system failure. The crew wants us to think it is. The implications hung in the air. Someone on the submarine was deliberately creating the appearance of a nuclear emergency. But why? What was really happening aboard the Connecticut? The room had gone from dismissive to riveted. Every eye now fixed on Elena's analysis. Richardson studied the display intently. If not a cooling system failure, then what's the real situation? Elena's expression remained focused, analytical. Based on these readings, I believe the Connecticut has encountered something unexpected, something the crew doesn't want to discuss on open channels, even encrypted ones. She highlighted another section of data. These power fluctuations are manual, deliberate power conservation. They're preparing for extended, silent running. Richardson's eyes narrowed slightly as he processed this information. They're hiding, he said quietly. Elena nodded. The question is, from what? And why create the appearance of a nuclear emergency as cover? The strategic implications were enormous. A nuclear-powered submarine, armed with tactical weapons, was deliberately going dark in international waters while broadcasting false information about its status. Victoria stepped forward again, her earlier dismissiveness now replaced with grudging professional focus. If Dr. Marquez's assessment is correct, and I'm not saying it is, we need to determine what the Connecticut might have encountered. Hostile vessels? Underwater surveillance? Some kind of test gone wrong? Elena shook her head slightly. The Connecticut's mission was routine patrol. They weren't conducting tests. She turned to Richardson. Admiral, I need to see the Connecticut's full mission parameters, crew roster, and last 3 position reports. There's something we're missing. Richardson hesitated only briefly before nodding to a communications officer. Get Dr. Marquez everything she needs. Priority clearance. He turned back to the room. Until we understand what's really happening, all rescue planning continues. As if the nuclear emergency is genuine, we prepare for the worst while investigating the truth. As officers dispersed to their tasks, Elena found herself suddenly isolated in a bubble of space. The same officers who had dismissed her earlier now keeping a respectful distance, their expressions a complex mixture of uncertainty, reassessment, and in some cases grudging respect. Victoria approached, her bearing still confident but her tone modulated. Dr. Marquez, she said quietly, I may have been premature in my assessment of your role here. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was an acknowledgement. Elena met her gaze directly. Captain Winters, she replied simply. I'm here to help find solutions, not collect apologies. If you have insights about the Connecticut or her crew, I'd value your input. Professional, focused, no grudges held. The response of someone who had long ago learned to prioritize mission over ego. As Elena moved toward a workstation where classified files were being prepared for her review, she felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. Somewhere beneath the dark waters of the North Atlantic, 79 sailors were facing an unknown threat. Sailors who had deliberately cut themselves off from support while sending misleading information about their situation. Whatever they were hiding from must be serious enough to warrant such extreme measures. Elena had spent enough time underwater in sealed metal tubes to understand the psychology of submarine crews. They didn't take such actions lightly. They were trained to seek support, to follow protocols, to maintain clear communications. For them to go dark like this meant they believed they had no choice. Elena glanced at the silent phone in her bag, the civilian phone she'd been planning to use to call her sister that evening, to discuss holiday plans like a normal person with a normal life. That call wouldn't be happening now. Instead, she was being pulled back into a world of silent warfare, classified threats, and life-or-death decisions made in windowless rooms far from public view. A world she had deliberately left behind after the incident that had cost 8 submariners their lives despite her best efforts to save them. As Elena settled at the secure workstation, files already loading on the screen, she felt a familiar calm settling over her, the focused, crystal clarity that had always come to her in crisis situations. The mockery, the dismissal, the sideways glances, all of that faded to irrelevance now. There was only the mission: find the Connecticut, understand the real threat, bring the crew home safely. Everything else was just noise. Elena Marquez had stepped back onto a naval base as a civilian consultant that morning. By noon, she had resumed the role she had never really left behind, the quiet professional who solved problems others couldn't even properly identify. As she began methodically reviewing the Connecticut's mission data, Elena was vaguely aware of the changed atmosphere in the room. The sideways glances now tinged with curiosity rather than dismissal, the respectful distance, the subtle deference suddenly shown to her analysis. None of it mattered. The crew of the Connecticut was in danger, real danger, not the fabricated nuclear emergency they wanted the world to believe in. Finding them, understanding their situation, and bringing them home safely, that was all that mattered now. And somewhere beneath the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic, 79 sailors were counting on her to decode their silent message and understand what they were truly facing, even if they couldn't tell her themselves. The classified files downloaded to Elena's secure terminal with remarkable speed, filling the screen with technical specifications, mission parameters, and crew profiles. She scanned them with practiced efficiency, her mind cataloging details and connections that others might miss. The room around her continued to buzz with activity. Officers coordinating potential rescue operations, communication specialists attempting to re-establish contact with the Connecticut, intelligence analysts reviewing recent naval movements in the region. Admiral Richardson approached her workstation, his presence commanding but not intrusive. "What are you seeing, Dr. Marquez?" Elena didn't look up immediately, her eyes still fixed on the scrolling data. "The Connecticut's mission was classified as routine patrol," she said quietly. "But they were carrying 3 specialized personnel who aren't part of the standard crew complement." She highlighted 3 names on the roster. Dr. Nathaniel Chen, sonar specialist with a background in marine bioacoustics. Dr. Amara Okafor, geophysicist specializing in tectonic anomalies. And Lieutenant Commander Rajiv Patel, underwater demolitions expert. Richardson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Not standard for routine patrol," he acknowledged. Elena nodded, pulling up a map showing the Connecticut's last 3 reported positions. "They were following a specific pattern," she continued, tracing the submarine's route. "Gradually increasing depth with each position report, maintaining a consistent heading toward this underwater ridge system." She expanded the topographical display. "This area is known for unusual acoustic properties, sound channels, thermoclines, natural features that can mask or distort sonar signatures." "What were they looking for?" Richardson's question was direct, pointed. Elena looked up at him for the first time since beginning her analysis. "Not what, Admiral?" "Who?" She pulled up another file, a classified intelligence report dated just 3 weeks earlier. "Russian submarine activity has increased 300% in this region over the past month. But not their usual attack subs or boomers. They've deployed their specialized deep-sea research vessels, the ones with modified hulls capable of extreme depths." Victoria Winters approached the workstation, her earlier hostility now replaced with professional focus. "You think the Connecticut encountered a Russian deep-diving vessel?" Elena shook her head slightly. "I think they encountered something the Russians have been searching for," she replied, highlighting a section of the sonar readings included in the Connecticut's last transmission. "These acoustic signatures are unlike anything in our database, not consistent with known submarine propulsion systems, marine life, or natural geological activity. Richardson leaned closer, studying the unusual waveform patterns. "What are we looking at, Dr. Marquez?" Elena's expression remained focused, analytical. "Something that doesn't want to be found," she said quietly. The Connecticut reported these anomalous readings, then went silent after fabricating a nuclear emergency. "They're hiding, maintaining minimum power signatures, conserving resources." Victoria crossed her arms, her brow furrowed. "Hiding from what? Russians?" Elena enlarged another section of the data. "From whatever is creating these sound patterns," she replied. The Connecticut's crew included specialists in bioacoustics, tectonic anomalies, and underwater demolitions. They were prepared to encounter something unusual, but whatever they found was significant enough to warrant going completely dark. The implications hung in the air between them. Richardson's expression grew more serious. "You're suggesting the Connecticut encountered something unexpected. Something beyond standard naval operations." Elena met his gaze directly. "I'm suggesting they found what they were actually sent to find, Admiral. The routine patrol classification was cover for something else entirely." She turned back to the displays, manipulating the data with practiced precision. "And now they're in trouble. Recommendations?" Richardson's question was simple, direct. The question of a commander who needed actionable intelligence, not theories. Elena didn't hesitate. "We need to establish communications with the Connecticut without broadcasting our intentions," she said firmly. "Standard rescue protocols will expose both our vessel and theirs to whatever they're hiding from. We need a covert approach." She highlighted an area of the map. "The underwater cavern system here could provide acoustic shielding. If we position a communication relay using an unmanned underwater vehicle, we might be able to establish a narrow-beam encrypted channel." Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "Time estimate?" Elena calculated quickly. 12 hours to position the relay, maybe longer if we need to avoid detection ourselves. She looked up at him again. "We also need to prepare for extraction. If the Connecticut is maintaining silent running to avoid detection, the crew may need rapid evacuation once their position is compromised." Victoria stepped forward. "I can coordinate the extraction team. We have specialized deep-water rescue assets on standby." Her tone had shifted completely, no longer dismissive or challenging, but collaborative and professional. Elena acknowledged her with a brief nod. "We'll need modified protocols," Elena added. "Standard rescue operations assume a disabled vessel. The Connecticut is likely fully operational but deliberately silent. Their emergency is tactical, not technical." Richardson turned to his communications officer. "Get the UUV team prepped immediately. Priority clearance for Dr. Marquez's communication relay plan." He looked back at Elena. "You'll oversee the operation personally." It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway. "Yes, sir." 5 years of civilian life fell away in that moment, the response automatic, ingrained. Richardson held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded once. "The rest of you," he addressed the room at large, "continue preparations for conventional rescue operations as cover. As far as anyone outside this room is concerned, we're responding to a nuclear emergency aboard the Connecticut. Nothing more." Officers dispersed to their tasks with renewed purpose, the atmosphere charged with focused energy. As Elena began programming the specialized communication relay, she became aware of Victoria standing nearby, watching her work. "Do you need something, Captain Winters?" Elena asked without looking up from her task. "I misjudged you," Victoria said quietly. "When you walked in..." Elena cut her off with a small shake of her head. "It doesn't matter," she said simply. "The only thing that matters right now is finding the Connecticut and bringing her crew home safely." She continued her programming, fingers moving across the interface with practiced precision. Victoria didn't leave immediately. "How did you know?" she asked after a moment. "About the false emergency?" Everyone else accepted it at face value. Elena paused briefly, considering the question. "Because I designed that system specifically to prevent false alarms," she replied. "And because I've been on the other side, underwater, isolated, facing an unknown threat. When you can't call for help directly, you find ways to send messages within messages. She looked up finally, meeting Victoria's gaze. The Connecticut's captain is telling us they're alive, but hiding. Our job is to understand why and to help without making their situation worse. Victoria nodded slowly, a new respect evident in her expression. I'll have my team ready for your signal. She turned to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, Dr. Marquez, I'm glad you're here. The words hung between them. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement. Elena gave a brief nod before returning to her work. There was no time for personal feelings or professional reconciliations. 79 lives hung in the balance, and every minute counted. Hours passed in a blur of focused activity. The UUV team prepared their specialized equipment according to Elena's specifications. Communications experts modified encryption protocols for the covert channel. Intelligence analysts continued monitoring Russian naval movements in the region, watching for any indication that they had detected the Connecticut's presence. At the center of it all, Elena worked with quiet intensity, her civilian clothes now the only reminder that she had walked into Naval Station Norfolk that morning as an outside consultant. In every other respect, she had seamlessly resumed her former role, the submarine officer who could navigate crisis situations with unshakable calm and laser-focused competence. Richardson found her reviewing final preparations for the UUV launch, her expression betraying nothing of the pressure she must be feeling. "Dr. Marquez," he said quietly. "A moment." She followed him to a private corner of the command center, away from the bustle of ongoing operations. "There's something you should know," Richardson said, his voice low. The specialists aboard the Connecticut, Chen, Okafor, and Patel, they were assembled specifically for this mission. Their presence wasn't coincidental. Elena waited, saying nothing. Richardson continued. 3 months ago, one of our deep-sea monitoring stations detected an acoustic anomaly unlike anything previously recorded. The signature matched nothing in our database, not Russian, not Chinese, not any known submarine or underwater drone technology. Elena processed this information quickly. The Connecticut was sent to investigate this anomaly specifically, not on routine patrol. It wasn't a question. Richardson nodded. The mission was classified at the highest levels. Only the captain and executive officer knew the true objective. The rest of the crew believed they were on standard patrol. He met her gaze directly. What concerns me is that the Connecticut found something significant enough to warrant going completely dark, fabricating an emergency and cutting off all standard communications. They're containing information, Elena said thoughtfully. Whatever they found, they don't want it broadcast, even on secure channels. Richardson's expression grew even more serious. Which suggests they believe standard naval communications might be compromised, he concluded. Or that the nature of their discovery is too sensitive for regular protocols. He handed her a small data device. This contains all the classified background on the original acoustic anomaly. I need your assessment, not just on how to contact the Connecticut, but on what they might have found. Elena accepted the device, understanding the weight of trust it represented. I'll review it immediately, she promised. Richardson hesitated, then added one more piece of information. The original monitoring station that detected the anomaly went offline 24 hours after transmission. Complete systems failure. The official investigation ruled it an equipment malfunction, but... He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Elena absorbed this with the same outward calm she'd maintained throughout the crisis. But internally, new connections were forming, new possibilities, and dangers, taking shape. "Thank you for telling me, Admiral," she said simply. "It changes the operational parameters." Richardson nodded once. "I thought it might." He glanced at his watch. "The UUV launches in 30 minutes. I want you on the command channel personally." Elena nodded. "I'll be ready." As Richardson walked away, Elena inserted the data device into her secure terminal, new urgency driving her analysis. Whatever the Connecticut had found, it wasn't just unusual. It was potentially dangerous enough to warrant extreme measures, both by the submarine's crew and by Naval Command. The UUV launch proceeded with methodical precision. The specialized underwater vehicle, smaller than a compact car but packed with advanced sensors and communication equipment, slipped beneath the waves with barely a ripple, beginning its carefully calculated journey toward the underwater cavern system where Elena believed they might establish contact with the Connecticut. From the command center, Elena monitored the UUV's progress, making minute adjustments to its course and depth to avoid detection. Hours passed in tense silence, the atmosphere in the room growing increasingly focused as the UUV approached its destination. "Entering the cavern system now," reported the UUV operator, his eyes fixed on the incoming telemetry. "Acoustic shielding is optimal at this position." Elena leaned forward, studying the data streams with intense focus. "Deploy the communication relay," she instructed. "Minimum power. Narrowest possible beam. Encrypted burst transmission only." The operator nodded, executing her commands with careful precision. "Relay deployed," he confirmed after a moment. "Initiating first contact attempt." The room fell completely silent, all eyes on the communication displays. 1 minute passed. 2. Nothing. "Adjust frequency to match the Connecticut's secondary emergency band," Elena suggested. "And include the authentication code from their mission parameters." The communications specialist made the changes quickly. "Transmitting now," she reported. More silent seconds ticked by. Then, suddenly, a single burst of data appeared on the screen. Short, encrypted, almost impossibly brief. The specialist's hands flew across her console. "We have contact!" Extremely low power signal. But it's definitely the Connecticut. Elena moved to the communication station immediately. "Decryption?" The specialist worked feverishly. "Working on it." "There." The decoded message appeared on screen, terse and urgent. "Proximity alert. Maintain silence. Anomaly active. Multiple signatures. Not Russian. Not ours. Observing only. Do not approach. Repeat. Do not approach." The implications sent a chill through the room. The Connecticut wasn't hiding from Russian vessels or conventional underwater threats. They had encountered something else entirely, something unusual enough to warrant complete communications blackout. "Can we establish two-way communication?" Richardson asked, his voice tight with controlled tension. The specialist shook her head. "They've already terminated the connection from their end, sir. It was a one-way burst transmission only." Elena studied the message again, her mind racing through possibilities. "They're telling us they've encountered multiple instances of the acoustic anomaly," she said quietly. "Active signatures, not just recordings or residual patterns. And they're maintaining observation without engagement." She looked up at Richardson. "They're conducting first contact protocols, Admiral." The weight of her words settled over the room like a physical presence. "First contact protocols, the highly classified procedures developed for scenarios involving potential non-human intelligence. Procedures that began with absolute communications silence to prevent unauthorized disclosure." "You believe?" Richardson began, then stopped, reformulating his question. "Based on the data and this transmission, what exactly do you think the Connecticut has encountered?" Elena chose her words carefully, aware of the gravity of her assessment. "Something previously unknown to naval intelligence," she said. "Something that creates acoustic signatures unlike any known technology or natural phenomenon. Something numerous enough to register as multiple signatures on the Connecticut's advanced sensors. And something that both we and the Russians have been actively searching for." Victoria stepped forward, her expression tense. "Are we talking about some kind of new Russian or Chinese underwater drone system? Experimental technology?" Elena shook her head slightly. "The message specifically states, not Russian, not ours. The Connecticut's captain is deliberately telling us they've encountered something outside known military technology." She turned back to the displays, reviewing the original acoustic anomaly data Richardson had provided. "These patterns, they're not random, there's structure here, complexity beyond what we typically see in mechanical systems." Richardson's expression remained carefully neutral, but the tension in his posture was evident. "Recommendations, Dr. Marquez?" Elena didn't hesitate. "We honor the Connecticut's request. No direct approach, no rescue attempt unless they specifically call for it. They're maintaining observation for a reason." She turned to face him fully. But we position assets nearby, covertly, minimum signatures, ready to extract the crew if the situation changes. And we maintain the nuclear emergency cover story to keep other interested parties from investigating the area. Richardson nodded slowly. I'll brief the Secretary of the Navy. This goes beyond standard operational parameters. He glanced around the room at the assembled officers and specialists, all watching with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. What was discussed in this room stays in this room. Level 10, classification, effective immediately. As the command center reorganized around the new operational directives, Elena found herself momentarily alone at her workstation, the weight of what they had discovered settling on her shoulders. After 5 years as a civilian researcher, she had been pulled back into service to find a missing submarine, only to discover they were facing something far beyond routine naval emergencies. Somewhere beneath the dark waters of the North Atlantic, the Connecticut and her crew were maintaining silent observation of something unknown, something significant enough to warrant the most extreme protocols in naval operations. And Elena, who had walked into Naval Station Norfolk that morning amid dismissive stares and whispered mockery, now stood at the center of what might be the most important naval discovery in human history. Victoria approached her workstation again, her expression thoughtful. "You knew," she said quietly. "Not specifically what the Connecticut found, but you understood the significance of their actions immediately." "How?" Elena considered the question for a moment. "Because I helped write those protocols," she finally replied. "After my last deployment, before I left active service, I was part of a specialized task force assigned to develop response strategies for unconventional encounters." She met Victoria's gaze directly. Most people thought it was theoretical, a bureaucratic exercise. I never did. Understanding dawned in Victoria's eyes. "That's why you left the service. You believed it was real, that we might actually encounter something unknown." It wasn't quite a question, but Elena answered anyway. "I believe we should be prepared," she said simply. "Whether the unknown came from foreign military technology, natural phenomena we didn't yet understand, or..." She paused. "Something else entirely." She turned back to her displays. "Now we wait and see which it is." 12 hours later, the command center had transformed into a specialized operation hub. Conventional rescue assets remained on standby as cover, but the real focus had shifted to covert monitoring of the area surrounding the Connecticut's last known position. UUVs maintained silent vigil at strategic distances, gathering data without active sonar or detectable emissions. Elena had barely left her station, analyzing the minimal data they could gather without risking detection. The acoustic anomalies continued, sometimes fading completely, other times intensifying in patterns that suggested deliberate movement. Richardson approached her workstation, coffee in hand. "You should rest," he said, offering her the cup. "You've been at this for almost 24 hours straight." Elena accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, but showed no signs of leaving her post. "I'm fine, Admiral," she replied. "There's something in these patterns I can almost see, some kind of structure or language. I just can't quite grasp it yet." Richardson studied her with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said quietly, "when I requested you specifically for this operation, there were those who questioned the decision. They said you'd been out of active service too long, that your civilian research had made you soft." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I think they've reconsidered their assessment." Elena's attention remained on her displays. "What people think of me has never been particularly relevant to my work, Admiral," she said simply. Richardson nodded. "Which is precisely why you were the right choice," he replied. "When everyone else saw a nuclear emergency, you saw a message. When everyone else saw a submarine in distress, you saw a vessel in deliberate hiding. You see past assumptions to what's actually happening." Before Elena could respond, an alert flashed on her screen. A new transmission from the Connecticut, another brief, encrypted burst. She straightened immediately, fingers flying across the interface. "We have new contact," she announced, drawing the attention of the entire room. The decoded message appeared on screen. "Anomaly retreating to deeper waters. Maintaining observation at maximum safe depth. Unusual structure detected on seafloor. Coordinates attached. Investigate with caution." Repeat caution. Attached to the message was a precise set of coordinates several miles from the Connecticut's position, along with a brief sonar image showing what appeared to be a geometric structure on the ocean floor, something with straight lines and regular patterns that seemed distinctly artificial. The room erupted into controlled activity. Richardson leaned in, studying the image carefully. "Natural formation?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Elena shook her head. "Not likely, sir. Those angles are too precise, too regular. And it's positioned exactly at the convergence point of the acoustic anomalies we've been tracking." She looked up at him, her expression serious but steady. "The Connecticut has found something, Admiral. Something significant." Richardson straightened, decision made. "Prepare a specialized deep-sea investigation unit. Minimal footprint. Maximum discretion. Dr. Marquez will oversee the operation personally." He turned to Elena. "I need someone who sees what's actually there, not what they expect to see." Elena nodded once, accepting the enormous responsibility without hesitation. "We'll need specialized equipment. Deep-sea pressure suits, advanced imaging systems, non-invasive sampling tools." Her mind was already cataloging requirements, planning approaches, considering contingencies. "You'll have whatever you need," Richardson assured her. "This discovery goes beyond standard naval operations. It's potentially—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Historic." As preparations began for the deep-sea investigation, Elena found herself the center of a very different kind of attention than she had received that morning. Officers who had dismissed her hours earlier now sought her input, her approval, her expertise. The mocking whispers had been replaced by respectful consultation, the sideways glances transformed into direct requests for guidance. None of it affected her focus or changed her approach. Elena Marquez had never needed external validation to know her own worth. She had walked into Naval Station Norfolk that morning, knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. A nuclear submarine expert with unparalleled experience and knowledge. The only difference now was that everyone else knew it too. 3 days later, as Elena prepared to board the specialized deep-sea submersible that would take her and a small team to investigate the mysterious structure, Victoria approached her on the loading dock. The captain's bearing was different now. Not diminished, but changed, the arrogance replaced by genuine professional respect. "Dr. Marquez," she said, extending her hand. "I wanted to wish you success on this mission." Elena accepted the handshake with a brief nod. Victoria continued, "I also wanted to say that your handling of this situation has been exemplary. We all misjudged you when you first arrived, and for that, I personally apologize." Elena studied her for a moment, then replied simply, "Captain Winters, in my experience, it's not about first impressions or last impressions. It's about the work you do in between. Judge me by my results, not by my appearance or my uniform, or lack thereof." She gestured toward the submersible. "And if all goes well, those results will speak for themselves." Victoria nodded, a new understanding in her eyes. "Good luck down there, Doctor. Whatever you find, I have a feeling naval history will never be quite the same." As Elena boarded the submersible, preparing to descend into the depths to investigate what might be the most significant discovery in human history, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had walked into Naval Station Norfolk as an outsider, judged and dismissed by those who saw only her civilian clothes and quiet demeanor. She would descend into the depths of the ocean as the leader of a historic mission, respected not because of rank or uniform, but because of her knowledge, her insight, and her unshakable composure under pressure. The mockery, the dismissal, the sideways glances, none of it had ever defined her. What defined Elena Marquez was what had always defined her: the quiet certainty of her own expertise, the calm clarity of her analytical mind, and the steadfast commitment to her mission that had guided her throughout her career, both in uniform and out of it. As the submersible's hatch sealed and the vessel prepared for descent, Elena felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over her. Whatever awaited them in the dark depths below, whether advanced technology, natural phenomenon, or something beyond current human understanding, she would observe it, analyze it, and report it with the same methodical precision and unshakable calm that had carried her through 2 decades of service. The woman they had mocked that morning for her civilian clothes and unassuming presence was now leading humanity's first contact with the unknown, not because she had demanded recognition or insisted on respect, but because when the moment called for true expertise and clear-eyed analysis, she had been the one person in the room who could see past assumptions to the truth. As the submersible began its descent into the darkness, Elena Marquez prepared to make history, quietly, methodically, and with the same composed confidence that had always been her greatest strength. Not because she needed to prove herself to those who had doubted her, but because that was simply who she was, the woman who saw what others missed, who understood what others misinterpreted, and who remained steady when others faltered. In the control room above, officers gathered around monitors tracking the submersible's descent. Admiral Richardson stood watching, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said to no one in particular, "when I asked who could operate nuclear submarines this morning, I never expected we'd be making history by the afternoon." He shook his head slightly. "Sometimes the most valuable person in the room is the one no one notices, until the moment when everything depends on them." As the submersible disappeared into the depths, carrying Elena toward whatever awaited at those mysterious coordinates, Naval Station Norfolk fell silent in collective anticipation. Whatever emerged from those depths would change everything. But one thing had already changed permanently. No one would ever again underestimate the quiet woman in the standard-issue uniform, who had calmly raised her hand that morning when a question was asked that only she could answer. The deep-sea submersible descended through layers of increasingly pressurized darkness, its specialized hull creaking slightly as they passed 2,000 meters. Inside the cramped cabin, Elena and her 3-person team monitored an array of sensors and displays, their faces illuminated by the blue-green glow of screens showing sonar readings, pressure data, and thermal imaging. "Approaching 3,000 meters, announced Lieutenant Zhang, the pilot. "All systems nominal." Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on the sonar display where faint echoes of the acoustic anomalies continued to register at irregular intervals like whispers in the deep, barely perceptible, but undeniably present. "The Connecticut is maintaining position approximately 5 kilometers southwest of our descent path," reported Commander Hayes, communications specialist. "Still running silent, minimal power signatures." Elena acknowledged the information with a brief nod, her focus unwavering. Dr. Marcus Reed, the team's marine archaeologist and xenobiology expert, leaned forward, studying the preliminary scans of the seafloor ahead. "These formations are unlike anything in our database," he said quietly. "The regularity suggests intelligent design, but the scale—" He shook his head slightly. "It's massive." Elena adjusted the scanning parameters, enhancing resolution as they descended closer to their target. 4,000 meters, Zhang announced. "Entering the abyssal zone. External temperature holding at 2 degrees Celsius. The pressure outside the hull now exceeded 400 atmospheres, enough to crush conventional submarines like eggshells." "I'm detecting unusual material compositions," Reed noted, frowning at his specialized scanner. "Not matching any known alloys or geological formations." He looked up at Elena. "Whatever this structure is, it's not made of standard earthly materials." The implications hung in the pressurized air between them. Elena remained outwardly calm, adjusting their approach vector slightly to optimize scanning coverage. "Let's maintain distance initially," she instructed Zhang. "Full passive scanning before we consider closer approach." As they descended through 4,500 meters, the submersible's powerful external lights began to illuminate the seafloor below, a vast, alien landscape of volcanic ridges, abyssal plains, and the strange geometric structure that had brought them to these depths. "My God," breathed Hayes, as the formation came fully into view. What had appeared as a simple geometric pattern in the Connecticut's sonar image now revealed itself as something far more complex, a massive structure covering nearly half a kilometer of seafloor, with interlocking geometric segments arranged in concentric patterns around a central dome. The entire formation gleamed with a dull, metallic sheen that reflected their lights in ways that seemed to shimmer and shift as they watched. "It's beautiful," Reed whispered, his scientific detachment momentarily forgotten in the face of such an extraordinary discovery. Elena said nothing, her mind systematically processing what they were seeing, cataloging details, forming hypotheses, planning their approach. 5,000 meters, Zhang announced. We're at operating depth for the structure's position. Elena nodded, making a decision. Take us in a wide circumference pattern, she instructed. I want complete scanning data from all angles before we approach directly. Zhang nodded, adjusting their course to begin a methodical orbit around the massive structure. As they circled, their sensors gathered data that only deepened the mystery. The structure showed no signs of corrosion despite being at crushing depths where metal should deteriorate. Thermal imaging revealed areas of slightly elevated temperature, not dramatic enough to suggest active power sources, but consistent enough to indicate the structure wasn't simply inert. Most strikingly, the acoustic anomalies that had first drawn naval attention to this region seemed to emanate directly from the central dome, pulsing outward in complex patterns that defied conventional analysis. These aren't random, Elena said, studying the acoustic signatures. There's structure here, consistency, almost like… She hesitated. Like a language, Reed finished for her, his expression a mixture of scientific fascination and barely contained awe. Regular patterns with variations that follow consistent rules. It has all the hallmarks of a communication system. After completing their initial survey, Elena directed Zhang to position them near the structure's perimeter, close enough for detailed observation but maintaining a respectful distance. We observe only, she reminded the team. No active interventions, no sampling, no attempts at contact. Hayes looked up from her communications console. Dr. Marquez, we're receiving a new transmission from the Connecticut. Elena moved to her station immediately. Let me see. The message was characteristically brief. Anomaly activity increasing. Directional movement toward your position. Maintain distance. Prepare for possible retreat. Elena processed this information quickly, her mind calculating implications and response options. Zhang, be prepared for rapid ascent if necessary, she ordered calmly. Hayes, maintain open channel with the Connecticut. Reed, continue passive data collection at maximum resolution. They waited, suspended in the crushing depths beside the mysterious structure, minutes stretching into tense silence. Then Reed's sensor panel lit up with new readings. Movement detected, he reported, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Multiple signatures approaching from the northwest quadrant, the same direction as the Connecticut's position. Elena moved to the main viewing port, adjusting the external lighting to illuminate the water beyond the structure. At first, there was nothing visible but the endless dark blue of the abyssal zone. Then, moving into the edge of their light field, something that defied immediate categorization. They were vaguely cylindrical in form, perhaps 3 meters in length, with surfaces that seemed to ripple and shift as they moved through the water. They emitted no visible light of their own, but their bodies reflected the submersible's lights in patterns of iridescence that suggested complex surface structures. Most remarkably, they moved with deliberate precision, maintaining formation as they approached the central dome of the seafloor structure. Are those biological? Hayes whispered, the professional detachment in her voice cracking slightly. Reed stared at his readings, shaking his head in wonderment. They're registering as partially biological, partially something else. I've never seen hybridization like this. He looked up at Elena. They're the source of the acoustic signatures. Each one is generating patterns in sequence with the others. Elena watched the entities. She couldn't think of a more precise term as they gathered around the central dome. There were 7 of them now visible, moving in synchronized patterns that seemed ritualistic in their precision. They're interacting with the structure, she observed quietly. Notice how the dome's surface texture changes as they approach. Indeed, the previously solid-appearing surface of the dome now seemed to ripple in response to the entities' movements, creating patterns that mirrored their acoustic emissions. It's a dialogue, Reed breathed. They're communicating with the structure, or with something inside it. As if in response to his words, the central section of the dome began to shift, segments sliding apart to reveal an opening large enough to accommodate the entities. One by one, they entered the structure, their bodies undulating in what appeared to be specific sequences unique to each entity. As the last one disappeared inside, the dome sealed itself seamlessly, leaving no visible indication of the opening that had admitted them. Did we just witness a deep-sea species returning to its habitat? Or something much more significant? Hayes asked, her voice hushed despite the privacy of their submersible. Elena didn't answer immediately, her mind working through the implications of what they had observed. "Zhang, hold position," she finally instructed. "Hayes, transmit our observational data to the Connecticut. Encrypted burst only. Read, compile all sensor readings for comprehensive analysis." She turned to face her team fully. "What we've just witnessed goes beyond anything in naval or scientific records. We need to be methodical, precise, and, above all, cautious." The next 3 hours passed in intensive data collection and analysis. The structure remained seemingly dormant after accepting the entities, but detailed scans revealed subtle energy fluctuations throughout its geometric patterns. The acoustic emissions continued at lower intensity, now originating from within the structure itself. Elena was reviewing thermal imaging data when Hayes suddenly straightened at her console. "Dr. Marquez, the Connecticut is moving. They've broken silent running and are approaching our position." Elena frowned, immediately concerned. "That contradicts standing orders. Establish direct communication, priority channel." Hayes worked her console quickly. "Channel open," she reported after a moment. Elena leaned toward the communication system. "Connecticut, this is Marquez. You've broken protocol. Explain." There was a brief pause before the submarine's captain responded, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Dr. Marquez, we've detected multiple surface vessels converging on your position. Russian signatures moving fast. They've launched deep-water drones. Your operation is compromised. Recommend immediate extraction." Elena processed this development swiftly. "Understood, Connecticut. Maintain your position. We'll initiate ascent." She turned to Zhang. "Begin ascent procedures. Minimal power signature until we clear 4,000 meters." As Zhang prepared the submersible for their return journey, Elena took one last look at the mysterious structure through the viewing port. What they were leaving behind was potentially the most significant discovery in human history. Evidence of technology, or life beyond human understanding, dwelling in the darkest depths of Earth's oceans. "We'll be back," she said quietly, almost to herself. "This isn't an ending. It's a beginning." Reed, overhearing her, nodded in agreement, his expression showing the same mixture of reluctance and resolution that Elena felt. They had glimpsed something profound, and walking away, even temporarily, felt like abandoning a cathedral mid-prayer. Their ascent began smoothly, the submersible rising through the crushing depths with deliberate care. At 3,000 meters, Hayes received another transmission from the Connecticut. "Russian drones have locked onto your ascent path," the submarine's captain reported. "We're positioning to provide countermeasures, but your submersible will be exposed during final ascent." Surface vessels are still converging. Elena considered their options, none of them ideal. "Connecticut, can you provide specific drone positions?" she requested. The information appeared on their tactical display moments later. 3 Russian deep-water drones moving in an interception pattern that would reach them before they could surface. Elena studied the bathymetric charts of their location, noting a narrow underwater canyon that ran perpendicular to their current ascent path. "Zhang, adjust course," she instructed. "Bearing 057 through the eastern canyon. The rock formation should disrupt their sonar tracking." Zhang nodded, immediately altering their course. The submersible banked slightly, heading toward the jagged underwater formation that might provide them some cover. They had just entered the canyon when Hayes's console lit up with proximity warnings. "Drone approaching, 300 meters and closing fast," she reported tensely. Elena remained calm, studying the tactical display. "Zhang, decrease depth by 100 meters, then full stop. Cut all non-essential systems." Zhang executed the commands with precision, the submersible dropping lower in the canyon and powering down to near silence. Through the viewing ports, they could see nothing in the dark waters, but their passive sensors tracked the Russian drone as it passed almost directly overhead, its sonar pinging actively as it searched for them. For tense minutes, they remained motionless in the underwater canyon, the drone circling in increasingly wider patterns as it lost their signature. Finally, it moved away, continuing its programmed search pattern in another sector. "Clever," Reed remarked quietly. "Using the canyon acoustics to mask our position." Elena nodded slightly, already planning their next move. "We'll stay within geological formations as much as possible during ascent," she decided. "Maintain minimal power signatures and use current flows to assist movement where possible." She turned to Hayes. "Inform the Connecticut of our approach plan. We'll need their support for the final ascent phase." The next 2 hours were an exercise in patience and precision as they gradually worked their way toward the surface, using underwater terrain features for cover and minimizing their detectable presence. The Russian drones continued their search patterns, but always just far enough away from their actual position. At 500 meters depth, with the surface tantalizingly close, Hayes received an urgent transmission from the Connecticut. Surface vessels directly overhead. 4 Russian ships, including their advanced oceanographic research vessel Academic Mstislav Keldysh. They've deployed a containment net. Direct descent is compromised. Elena's mind worked through scenarios rapidly, evaluating and discarding options. "Can the Connecticut create a diversion?" she asked. Hayes relayed the question and received an immediate response. "Affirmative. They can simulate an emergency surfacing at coordinates 10 kilometers east. It should draw attention and resources." Elena nodded decisively. "Tell them to proceed. We'll hold position until the diversion is underway, then surface at minimum observable profile." She turned to Zhang. "Prepare for final ascent using minimal ballast release. We want to slip through the surface with as little disturbance as possible." They waited as the Connecticut implemented their diversion plan. Soon, Hayes reported movement among the Russian vessels. 3 ships breaking away, heading east. Only the Keldysh remains in position above us. Elena studied their tactical display. "The Keldysh is their primary research vessel, not a combat ship," she noted. "They likely don't have weapon systems that could target us during ascent. Our biggest concern is being spotted and contained." She made her decision. "Zhang, take us up, southeastern approach angle. Use the thermal layer at 100 meters to mask our final approach." Their ascent resumed, tension mounting as they closed the distance to the surface. At 200 meters, they could see the dim outline of the Keldysh's hull above them, a dark shadow against the lighter surface waters. At 100 meters, they passed through a thermocline, a layer of water with a distinct temperature difference that created sonar distortion. 50 meters, Zhang reported quietly, their submersible now moving at its most minimal power setting, using buoyancy more than propulsion to complete their ascent. Through the viewing ports, the surface light grew stronger, the blue-black of the deep giving way to lighter aquamarine. Surface in 3, 2, 1. The submersible broke the surface with barely a ripple, its low-profile hatch emerging into open air for the first time in 12 hours. Elena moved quickly to the external viewing system, checking their position relative to the Russian vessel. The Keldysh was nearly half a kilometer away, its attention fixed on the eastern horizon where, presumably, the Connecticut's diversion was underway. Their submersible, with its specialized dark gray hull designed to blend with ocean waters, remained unnoticed in the vessel's blind spot. "Hayes, signal for extraction," Elena ordered. "Encrypted burst to Norfolk, not the Connecticut. We don't want to compromise their position." Quote, Hayes nodded, sending the brief transmission that would alert their extraction team. 20 minutes later, as they maintained their precarious position just at the surface, Hayes reported incoming aircraft. "Helicopter approaching from the southwest. Navy markings." Elena nodded with satisfaction. "Right on time." The specialized extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon, flying low to avoid early detection. It descended rapidly near their position, hovering just long enough for rapid extraction cables to be secured to their submersible's lift points. Within minutes, they were being airlifted away from the scene, their precious data and first-hand observations secure. As they gained altitude, Elena caught a final glimpse of the Keldysh still focused eastward, unaware that the prize they sought had quite literally been lifted from under their noses. The extraction had been executed with the same precision and calm efficiency that had characterized their entire mission. No drama, no heroics, just methodical competence. 3 hours later, they touched down at a secure naval facility where Admiral Richardson waited on the tarmac, his expression revealing nothing to casual observers but speaking volumes to Elena. As she descended from the aircraft, data storage devices secured in her pack, he stepped forward to meet her. "Dr. Marquez," he said formally, though the subtle nod that accompanied her name carried significant weight. "Welcome back. Your preliminary report?" Elena matched his professional tone. "The structure appears to be of non-human origin, showing evidence of advanced technology beyond current scientific understanding," she reported succinctly. "We observed entities interacting with it in ways that suggest intelligent communication. Full data collected and secured." She handed him a small, specialized storage device. "Priority classification recommended." Richardson accepted the device with a brief nod. "Walk with me," he said, leading her away from the busy landing area toward a more private section of the facility. Once they were alone, his formal demeanor softened slightly. "The Connecticut has also returned safely," he informed her. "Their diversion was successful, and they've docked at a secure location for debriefing." He studied her face carefully. "Elena, what you've discovered? The implications are staggering." She nodded, allowing herself a moment to acknowledge the enormity of what they had witnessed. "It changes everything, Admiral. Not just naval operations or scientific understanding, but potentially our entire conception of life on Earth." She met his gaze directly. "We're not alone on this planet. We may never have been." Richardson absorbed this with the gravitas it deserved. "The Secretary of the Navy has convened a special committee. Top scientists, military strategists, policy experts. They'll want your full briefing within 24 hours. He hesitated, then added, "There's already debate about how to proceed. Some advocate for immediate technological engagement, others for military containment." Elena shook her head firmly. Both approaches would be premature and potentially catastrophic. "We observed something ancient and advanced, with capabilities we don't begin to understand. This requires careful, methodical study, not hasty engagement or confrontation." A ghost of a smile touched Richardson's face. "Those were almost exactly my words to the Secretary." His expression grew serious again. "Which is why I've recommended you to head the ongoing research initiative. We need someone who sees what's actually there, not what military or political agendas want to see." The offer hung in the air between them, a return to service, to purpose, to the world she had left behind 5 years earlier. But not as she had left it. This would be something new, something unprecedented. "I need time to consider," she said finally. Richardson nodded, unsurprised. "Of course, but not too much time. Events are moving quickly." He gestured toward the main facility. "Your team is already in debriefing. I've arranged quarters for you to rest before joining them." As they walked toward the building, he added, "By the way, there's someone waiting to see you." Elena raised an eyebrow in question. Richardson's expression softened slightly. "Captain Winters has been coordinating the data analysis team since your submersible launched. She's been working around the clock to prepare for your return." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The woman who had dismissed Elena so thoroughly at their first meeting, now eagerly awaiting her return. Inside the facility, Victoria Winters stood at a data console, directing a team of analysts with focused efficiency. When she saw Elena enter, she straightened immediately, dismissing her team with a brief gesture before approaching. "Dr. Marquez," she said, extending her hand, "your team's preliminary data is already transforming our understanding of deep-sea phenomena. The acoustic pattern analysis is particularly revolutionary." There was genuine professional respect in her voice now, no trace of the condescension that had marked their first encounter. Elena accepted the handshake with a brief nod. "Your analysis team has done exceptional work processing the initial data packets we transmitted. It will help contextualize our direct observations." She glanced at the displayed findings, noting the thoroughness of their preliminary conclusions. Victoria hesitated, then spoke more personally. "When you first walked into that briefing room, I saw someone who didn't belong. Someone who didn't fit my preconception of a naval expert." She met Elena's gaze directly. I've never been more wrong about anyone in my entire career." Elena could have accepted the apology, acknowledged the change in Victoria's perception, completed the expected social exchange. Instead, she chose to redirect to what truly mattered. "The entities we observed, your team's acoustic analysis shows patterns consistent with language, correct?" Victoria blinked at the sudden return to substantive matters, then nodded, turning back to the data displays. "Yes, we've identified recurring acoustic sequences that follow rules similar to linguistic structure. Dr. Chen from MIT believes it may be the first conclusive evidence of non-human communication systems on Earth." For the next hour, they reviewed the analysis findings together, two professionals focused entirely on understanding one of the most significant discoveries in human history. The personal dynamics between them, the initial dismissal, the grudging recognition, the eventual respect, all faded to irrelevance in the face of what they were now jointly exploring. When Admiral Richardson returned to check on their progress, he found them deep in discussion about the geometric patterns of the seafloor structure, all past friction completely set aside in service of their shared mission. He watched them for a moment, noting how completely Elena had integrated herself into the analysis process despite having been back on solid ground for less than 2 hours. "Dr. Marquez," he said, interrupting their discussion, "the committee is assembling earlier than expected. They've requested your presence for initial briefing in 30 minutes. Elena nodded, already organizing her presentation materials. "I'll be ready," she assured him. As Richardson left to make further arrangements, Victoria looked at Elena with newfound admiration. "You haven't slept in nearly 36 hours, she observed. "You've been under extreme pressure at crushing depths, executed a high-risk extraction, and now you're about to brief the highest levels of naval command on potentially the most significant discovery in human history. How are you so calm?" Elena considered the question for a moment. "Because the work matters more than how I feel about it," she said simply. "The significance of what we've discovered deserves my best thinking, not my fatigue or emotions." She gathered her materials, adding, "I learned long ago that true expertise isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about serving the mission, whatever that mission might be." As she prepared to brief the special committee, composed of admirals, scientists, and government officials who would help shape humanity's response to this unprecedented discovery, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the moment she had quietly raised her hand in that crowded conference room, answering Admiral Richardson's question about submarine operation, to the depths of the ocean where she had witnessed something beyond human understanding, she had remained fundamentally the same person. The dismissive stares and whispered mockery of that first morning seemed to belong to another lifetime now. The officers who had judged her by her unassuming appearance now awaited her guidance on matters that would reshape scientific and military thinking for generations to come. But Elena herself hadn't changed. She had simply continued to be who she had always been, methodical, focused, unshakably calm in the face of the unknown. As she entered the briefing room where the special committee awaited her report, Elena Marquez carried with her not just the data from their extraordinary discovery, but a quiet certainty about her own place in the unfolding story. She would present the facts as they had observed them, recommend the careful, methodical approach that the situation demanded, and guide these powerful decision-makers toward wisdom rather than haste. And later, when decisions had been made and new missions planned, she would return to the depths where those mysterious entities dwelled, not to conquer or exploit, but to understand. Because that was who Elena Marquez had always been, the person who saw what others missed, who approached the unknown with respect rather than fear, and who remained steady when others faltered. The door closed behind her as she faced the assembled officials, their expressions ranging from anticipation to concern to barely concealed excitement. Admiral Richardson nodded to her from his position at the table, a simple gesture of confidence and trust. Elena placed her materials on the podium, looked out at the faces that would help shape humanity's first formal acknowledgement of non-human intelligence on Earth, and began speaking with the same calm clarity that had characterized her throughout this extraordinary journey. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and authoritative, What we discovered at 5,000 meters depth appears to be evidence of intelligent non-human presence in Earth's oceans. I will present our observations methodically, beginning with the structure itself and proceeding to the entities that interact with it. As she spoke, guiding them through humanity's first glimpse of something truly beyond their understanding, Elena embodied the principle that had defined her career both in and out of uniform. True expertise needs no validation, true leadership requires no title, and the most powerful voice in any room often belongs to the person who never needed to raise it, except when a question is asked that only they can answer. 3 months after the historic discovery, Elena stood at the observation window of the newly established Deep Ocean Contact Initiative facility, watching as specialized teams prepared for another expedition to the mysterious structure. The DOCI headquarters, built into the side of a coastal mountain for security and discretion, hummed with focused activity. Scientists analyzing data, engineers developing new deep-sea technologies, linguists working to decode the acoustic patterns they now called the chorus. What had begun as a naval crisis response had evolved into humanity's most significant scientific endeavor, a carefully coordinated international effort to understand the non-human intelligence dwelling in Earth's deepest water. And at the center of it all stood Elena Marquez, the unassuming woman whose calm expertise had transformed how humans understood their own planet. "The new submersible is ready for testing," announced Dr. Abigail Chen, head of engineering. "Designed specifically based on your observations of the entities' movement patterns. It should allow us to observe without disrupting their acoustic fields." Elena nodded, studying the sleek vessel being lowered into the facility's massive testing pool. "The propulsion system?" she asked, noting its unusual configuration. Chen smiled, pride evident in her expression. "Biomimetic design, inspired by the entities themselves, nearly silent, with minimal electromagnetic signature. It can maintain position in deep currents using a fraction of the energy our previous models required." The innovation represented exactly the approach Elena had advocated from the beginning, learning from what they observed rather than imposing human technological paradigms. Commander Hayes approached with a tablet displaying the latest data analysis. "Dr. Marquez, the pattern recognition algorithms have identified what appears to be a cyclical structure in the acoustic emissions. 37 days, precise to the minute." Elena studied the findings with intense focus. "Correlate with tidal patterns, lunar cycles, and geomagnetic fluctuations," she instructed. "And compare with the Russian data we've been sharing." The international cooperation had been one of her earliest and most strongly argued recommendations. This discovery was too important for national competition or secrecy. After initial resistance, the Naval Command had agreed. Within weeks, collaborative protocols had been established with Russian, Chinese, European, and other research teams. The Russians, who had been tracking similar anomalies in the Arctic Circle, brought valuable comparative data. The Chinese contributed advanced acoustic analysis techniques. European researchers provided expertise in xenobiology and communication theory. Dr. Marquez called a voice from across the observation deck. Elena turned to see Admiral Richardson approaching, accompanied by a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, African, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying herself with unmistakable authority. "A moment of your time," Richardson requested, his formal tone suggesting this was more than a casual introduction. Elena joined them in a private conference room, where Richardson made the introduction. "Dr. Marquez, this is Dr. Nala Mbeki, Secretary General of the United Nations. She's here to discuss the next phase of the DOCI initiative." Elena extended her hand, professional and composed despite the unexpected high-level visit. "Dr. Marquez," Mbeki began, her voice rich with a slight South African accent, "what you discovered 3 months ago has transformed international relations in ways we're still comprehending. Nations that were on the brink of conflict are now collaborating on understanding this phenomenon." Elena nodded, aware of the geopolitical shifts that had followed their discovery. The existence of advanced non-human intelligence had provided a powerful perspective shift for human conflicts. Traditional rivalries hadn't disappeared, but they had been contextualized in ways that made cooperation suddenly more logical than competition. "The UN Security Council has unanimously approved the formation of a permanent contact protocol committee," Mbeki continued. "They've requested that you lead it." The offer hung in the air, not just leadership of a scientific initiative, but a position that would help shape humanity's approach to something that transcended national boundaries and human history itself. Elena didn't answer immediately, considering the implications carefully. "The scientific work must remain primary," she finally said. "Political agendas can't override evidence-based approaches, and we need to maintain our commitment to observation without intervention. We're still learning the most basic aspects of their existence." Mbeki nodded, unsurprised by Elena's focus on the substantive rather than the prestigious aspects of the offer. "Those principles are written into the committee's founding charter. Your methodical approach has become the template for how we're proceeding." She smiled slightly. "You've created a new paradigm for first contact, Dr. Marquez. One based on patience, respect, and careful observation." After Mbeki departed, Richardson remained, studying Elena with a thoughtful expression. "When I asked who could operate nuclear submarines that morning, I never imagined where your raised hand would lead us." His tone carried a hint of something like wonder. "How does it feel to have changed human history?" Elena considered the question seriously. "It doesn't feel like I changed history," she finally replied. "It feels like I did my job. The same job I've always done. Observe carefully, analyze methodically, report accurately. The significance of the discovery doesn't change the process." She looked out the window at the bustling research facility below. "And the work is just beginning." Richardson nodded, understanding her perspective perfectly. "The committee meets in Geneva next month. You have until then to decide." As he turned to leave, he added, "By the way, Captain Winters has been nominated to head the Naval Liaison Division of DOCI. Her recommendation came with particularly strong endorsements from the scientific team." Elena allowed herself a small smile at this development. Victoria Winters, who had once dismissed her so completely, had become one of the most effective advocates for the methodical, evidence-based approach Elena had established. Personal rivalry had been transformed into professional respect, another small echo of the larger shift happening across human institutions as they adapted to a new understanding of Earth and their place on it. Later that evening, Elena stood on the facility's observation deck, watching the sun set over the Pacific. The vast ocean stretched to the horizon, its surface peaceful and ordinary in the golden light. Few looking at it would imagine the extraordinary intelligence dwelling in its darkest depths, entities that had perhaps been there for millennia, unknown and unsuspected by the humans who thought themselves Earth's dominant species. Dr. Marcus Reed joined her at the railing, his expression reflective. "I've been reviewing the historical data," he said. "Ancient maritime legends, unexplained phenomena, historical accounts of unusual ocean encounters." He shook his head slightly. "The clues were always there. We just didn't know how to interpret them." Elena nodded, unsurprised. "Human perception is shaped by expectation," she observed. "We see what we're prepared to see. Until recently, no one was prepared to see this." It was a truth that extended beyond their scientific discovery to her own experience, how she had been initially perceived based on expectations rather than reality. Reed studied her with thoughtful curiosity. "You know, when we were first preparing for that submersible mission, I wondered how you stayed so calm despite the pressure. Now I understand. You've always been exactly who you are, regardless of circumstance or how others perceive you." Elena didn't respond directly to the personal observation, instead turning her attention to their ongoing work. "The acoustic pattern analysis is showing promise. We're beginning to identify structures that could represent fundamental communication units." Reed accepted the redirection gracefully, recognizing her preference for focusing on the work rather than herself. "The mathematical consistencies are remarkable. Whatever these entities are, they communicate with precision that suggests highly organized thought processes." Their conversation was interrupted by an alert from Elena's secure tablet. New data was coming in from the deep-sea monitoring station they had established near the original structure. The acoustic emissions had suddenly intensified, showing a pattern they hadn't observed before. Within minutes, Elena had assembled the core research team in the central lab, displays showing the unusual readings from multiple angles. "The pattern is directional," noted Dr. Chen, studying the sensor data. "Unlike previous emissions that radiated outward, this is focused, like a transmission aimed at a specific location." Elena tracked the direction of the focused acoustics, her mind calculating possibilities. It's aimed toward the surface, she realized. Not at our monitoring station, but... She adjusted the display to show a broader view. Here, approximately 50 kilometers southeast, where the continental shelf begins to rise. The implication settled over the room. After months of patient observation and analysis, the entities appeared to be directing communication toward the surface world for the first time. Whether in response to human presence or for reasons of their own remained unclear, but the shift was significant. We need to establish a receiving station at these coordinates, Elena decided. Passive systems only, optimized to record whatever they're transmitting. She turned to the engineering team. How quickly can we deploy? 6 hours for a basic station, 12 for something more comprehensive, Chen replied after quick calculations. Elena nodded. Begin immediately and notify our international partners. This development should be monitored cooperatively. As the team mobilized, Elena felt a familiar clarity settling over her, the focused concentration that had always guided her through complex challenges. By dawn, specialized research vessels were positioning advanced acoustic receivers at the coordinates Elena had identified. Scientists from 6 countries coordinated their monitoring efforts, sharing data in real time through the protocols Elena had established months earlier. The focused transmission continued, its patterns growing more complex and varied as hours passed. In the DOCI command center, Elena studied the incoming data with unwavering attention, searching for patterns that might reveal meaning within the acoustic sequences. Linguistic experts worked alongside mathematicians and cryptographers, all seeking to understand what might be the first deliberate communication from a non-human intelligence to human civilization. There's mathematical consistency here, noted Dr. Yashimoto, head of pattern analysis. Prime number sequences embedded within the acoustic variations. This can't be coincidental. Others identified structural elements that suggested syntax, distinguishable units arranged according to consistent rules. It bears similarities to the patterns we observed between the entities themselves, Elena noted, but with significant modifications. They may be adapting their communication system to increase chances of human comprehension. The possibility that these mysterious beings were deliberately attempting to communicate with humans in an accessible format was both extraordinary and humbling. After 48 hours of continuous transmission, the signal suddenly ceased. The research team had recorded terabytes of data, but remained far from understanding its content. Yet the very existence of the transmission represented a breakthrough, evidence that the entities were aware of human presence and perhaps interested in establishing some form of contact. In the days that followed, analysis efforts intensified. The international team worked around the clock, applying every available technique to decode the mysterious message. Progress came in small increments: identification of recurring patterns, recognition of mathematical sequences, hints of organized structure that suggested deliberate communication rather than random noise. 2 weeks after the transmission, Elena presented their preliminary findings to a special session of the UN Security Council, convened in the DOCI facility to maintain security. Representatives from all major world powers listened with rapt attention as she methodically outlined what they had learned. While we cannot yet claim to understand the content of the transmission, she explained, displaying visualizations of the acoustic patterns, we have identified structural elements that strongly suggest intentional communication. The mathematical sequences, particularly the use of prime numbers, represent a universal language that transcends human linguistic systems. She continued with characteristic precision, neither minimizing the significance of their findings nor making claims beyond what the evidence supported. We believe this transmission represents an acknowledgement of our presence and possibly an invitation to further communication. The entities appear to be reaching out, though their exact intentions remain unknown. When she concluded her presentation, the chamber remained silent for several moments, the full weight of what she had described settling over the assembled officials. Then Dr. Mbeki spoke from her position at the center of the council table. Dr. Marquez, your team has achieved what many would have thought impossible just months ago. You've not only discovered a non-human intelligence on Earth, but potentially established the foundation for communication with it. She glanced around at her colleagues before continuing. The question now before this council is how humanity should respond. The discussion that followed revealed the range of perspectives among world powers. Some advocated for immediate response using similar acoustic patterns. Others urged continued passive observation. Military representatives raised security concerns, while scientific advisors emphasized the unprecedented opportunity for knowledge exchange. Throughout the debate, Elena remained the calm center, addressing questions with measured clarity and redirecting speculative tangents back to evidence-based considerations. When finally asked for her recommendation, she spoke with the same quiet authority that had guided the initiative from the beginning. We should acknowledge the communication with a response that demonstrates our understanding of their mathematical language, she advised. Simple, clear patterns that mirror elements of their transmission but introduce human mathematical concepts. Not an attempt at complex dialogue yet, but a confirmation that we recognize their effort to communicate. She paused, then added what she considered most important. And we must continue to approach this with patience and respect. We're not dealing with a new trading partner or strategic ally. We're encountering an intelligence that may have existed alongside us for millennia, with a perspective and understanding fundamentally different from our own. Our first priority should be to understand, not to exploit or control. The Council ultimately approved her recommendation, authorizing a carefully designed response transmission to be directed toward the coordinates where the original message had been focused. Elena would oversee its development and deployment, with international oversight but scientific leadership. As the facility prepared for this historic communication, Elena found herself momentarily alone in her office, reviewing the journey that had brought her to this extraordinary juncture. On the wall hung a simple frame containing the name badge she had worn that first day at Naval Station Norfolk, the day she had been dismissed and underestimated, until the moment she quietly raised her hand to answer Admiral Richardson's question about submarine operation. From that unassuming beginning had emerged humanity's first structured contact with a non-human intelligence. A contact characterized not by dramatic confrontation or conquest, but by patient observation, methodical analysis, and respectful approach. These were the qualities Elena had always embodied, the strengths that had always defined her work whether or not others recognized their value. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. Victoria Winters entered, now wearing the insignia of her new position as head of Naval Liaison. "The response transmission is ready for your final approval," she reported. "The team has incorporated the mathematical sequences you specified." Elena nodded, rising to review the final preparations. As they walked together toward the transmission center, Victoria spoke more personally than was her usual practice. "You know, I've been thinking about that first morning when you arrived at Norfolk. How differently things might have gone if someone else had been in charge of the Connecticut situation." Elena considered this briefly. "Someone else would have found their own approach," she said simply. "This isn't about any individual. It's about the work itself." It was the same perspective she had maintained throughout, focusing on the substance rather than personalities or credit, on contribution rather than recognition. In the transmission center, the international team waited for her final authorization. Representatives from 17 nations stood together, watching as Elena reviewed the carefully constructed response they had designed under her guidance. After thorough verification, she nodded her approval. "Initiate transmission," she instructed quietly. With that simple command, humanity sent its first deliberate communication to the mysterious intelligence dwelling in Earth's deep oceans, a message of acknowledgement and openness, carrying mathematical concepts that transcended human languages and cultures. As the acoustic signals pulsed outward through the depths, Elena stood watching the transmission data with the same calm focus she had maintained throughout this extraordinary journey. Whatever response might come, whether immediate or delayed, whether opening new understanding or revealing new mysteries, she would approach it with the same methodical clarity and unshakable composure. The woman who had once been dismissed for her unassuming appearance and civilian clothes now stood at the center of humanity's first contact with a non-human intelligence. Not because she had demanded recognition or sought prominence, but because when the moment called for true expertise and clear-eyed analysis, she had been the one person in the room who could see past assumptions to the truth. 6 weeks later, as Elena prepared for another deep-sea expedition to observe the mysterious structure, an alert sounded throughout the facility. The entities were responding to humanity's transmission with a new acoustic pattern, more complex, more varied, and unmistakably directed toward the human receiving station. As teams rushed to record and analyze this new communication, Elena maintained her characteristic calm, directing resources and coordinating international response with quiet efficiency. This was not an ending but a beginning, the opening of a dialogue that might continue for generations, gradually building understanding between profoundly different intelligences sharing the same planet. In her private moments, Elena sometimes reflected on the unlikely path that had led her to this historic role. How a simple raised hand in response to a question about submarine operation had set in motion events that would reshape humanity's understanding of Earth and its place in the universe. How qualities often overlooked, patience, methodical thinking, emotional steadiness, had proven essential for humanity's first contact with a non-human intelligence. But most often, her thoughts remained fixed on the work itself, the fascinating patterns emerging from their analysis, the careful preparations for deeper understanding, the methodical building of knowledge that had always been her truest passion. Because Elena Marquez had never needed external validation to know her own worth, or to contribute her greatest strengths. The woman who had once been mockingly asked if she was someone's assistant now led humanity's most important scientific initiative. The civilian whom naval officers had dismissed at first glance now shaped international policy on an issue that transcended national boundaries. The quiet expert who had been judged by her appearance rather than her knowledge now guided humanity's first steps toward understanding and intelligence beyond human experience. Not because she had changed to meet others' expectations, but because she had remained exactly who she had always been. The person who saw what others missed, who approached the unknown with respect rather than fear, and who remained steady when others faltered. In the end, it was not dramatic confrontation or loud assertions that had opened the door to this new understanding, but the quiet certainty of expertise confidently offered at precisely the right moment, when a question was asked that only she could answer. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.